May 1986, French convict Michel Vosger pulled off a prison escape straight out of a movie. Serving time in a Paris prison for armed robbery, Vosger had already attempted several breakouts before. This time, his plan involved a helicopter and the woman he loved. His wife, Nadine, played a key role. While Vosger spent months inside studying maps and rehearsing his moves, she was taking flying lessons. Her goal wasn't to get a pilot's license. It was to learn just enough to fly a helicopter into the prison yard. While inside La Santé prison, Vosger fashioned a mock grenade from tin cans filled with apricot jam and painted it to look real. On the day of the escape, he used it to threaten guards, forcing them to open doors and give him access to restricted areas. Step by step, he moved upward through the prison until he reached the roof, right where Nadine was scheduled to land the helicopter. Nadine timed her helicopter arrival perfectly with Michel Vosger's appearance on the roof. She had arranged to rent the helicopter under false pretenses, claiming it was for an aerial photography job. Once airborne, she flew directly toward La Santé prison and, at the exact time Vosger was in position, guided the helicopter over the high walls into the small prison courtyard area. She then landed it close enough for him to climb aboard immediately. Once airborne, they flew across Paris and landed on a soccer field, where they switched to a getaway car. The escape shocked the French public and embarrassed the prison system. Authorities launched a nationwide manhunt, but Vosger managed to stay hidden for months. Eventually, his run came to an end later that year during a failed robbery attempt, when he was seriously injured and captured. Nadine was arrested as well. In July 2015, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman pulled off one of the most audacious prison escapes in modern history. At the time, he was locked up in Mexico's most secure facility, Altiplano Prison, west of Mexico City. Surveillance cameras tracked his every move, but somehow he slipped away without anyone stopping him. It began late one evening when El Chapo walked to the shower area in his cell. He bent down behind a partition, just out of the camera's direct line of sight, and never reappeared. Guards assumed he was still inside. In reality, he had stepped into a hidden tunnel entrance cut directly into the concrete floor of his cell. That tunnel was a feat of planning and engineering. It stretched about a mile from the prison to a half-built house in a nearby field. At roughly 5 feet high and 30 inches wide, it was large enough to stand in, and it included ventilation, lighting, and even a modified motorcycle mounted on rails. The bike was used to ferry tools, dirt, and eventually El Chapo himself through the underground passage. Investigators later concluded the escape had been months, if not years, in the making. Construction crews, likely hired without knowing the full scope of the project, had dug with precision, ensuring the tunnel surfaced exactly inside his shower. The noise and dirt from such an operation were concealed by the remote location of the exit house. When Guzman emerged on the other side, a vehicle was waiting to take him away. By the time authorities realized he was gone, he had vanished into the countryside. The escape was a blow to the Mexican government and an embarrassment to its prison system, especially given that El Chapo had already escaped once before, in 2001. His freedom didn't last forever. He was recaptured in early 2016. In June 1962, 3 inmates at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary carried out one of the most famous prison break attempts in American history. Frank Morris and brothers Clarence and John Anglin spent months quietly preparing an escape from what was supposed to be an inescapable island fortress. Their cells were in a row along the prison's main cell block. They took ordinary prison-issued spoons and sharpened them into makeshift chisels. Along with that, they secretly built a small drill by taking the motor from a discarded vacuum cleaner and attaching homemade bits. This gave them just enough power to bore into the concrete around the ventilation openings in their cells. They worked at night, masking the noise with music and carefully hiding the damage behind painted cardboard panels. To buy themselves time on the night of the escape, the men created dummy heads out of plaster, toilet paper, and hair from the prison barbershop. These realistic heads were placed in their beds to fool guards during night checks. Once the holes were large enough, the men crawled through them into a utility corridor behind the cells. They climbed to the roof of the cell block, then made their way to an unused service area where they had been secretly assembling a makeshift raft and life vests out of over 50 stolen raincoats, stitched and glued together. On the night of June 11th, they slipped through a ventilator shaft, climbed down outside the prison building, and carried their raft to the water's edge. Under the cover of darkness, they pushed off into the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. By morning, Their beds appeared undisturbed, the dummy heads still in place. When the escape was discovered, a massive search began, but no definitive trace of the men was ever found. Whether they drowned or made it to freedom remains one of the enduring mysteries of American criminal history. In July 2001, 3 inmates in a Berlin prison pulled off an escape that relied on patience, planning, and the city's underground sewer network. The men, 2 Germans and 1 Cuban, were serving sentences for various crimes when they came up with a way to get out without climbing fences or overpowering guards. Their cells opened onto a shared workshop area in the prison. Over weeks, they carefully cut a hole in the floor large enough for a person to squeeze through. The opening led to a narrow utility shaft, which in turn connected to the prison's old drainage system. They worked at night, hiding the hole under a heavy workbench during the day to avoid detection. Once they reached the sewer system, they studied its layout to figure out where it connected to the outside world. The maze of tunnels ran beneath Berlin streets, carrying waste and storm water. It was dark, foul-smelling, and cramped, but it offered a hidden route beyond the prison walls. On the night of their escape, they slipped through the workshop floor and crawled into the sewers. Navigating by memory and instinct, they made their way through the tunnels, careful not to get lost in the labyrinth. Eventually, they emerged through a manhole cover on a quiet Berlin street, far from the prison grounds. By the time guards realized they were missing, the men had vanished into the city. On the night of May 3, 2022, Thabo Bester put into motion a plan that had been building for months inside Mongang Correctional Center. His goal was simple: leave prison while everyone believed he had died. The first step was planting a body. An unidentified man, killed by blunt force trauma, was smuggled into the prison and placed inside Bester's cell. That corpse would become his substitute. Next, a fire was set in the cell. When flames broke out, guards assumed Bester was still inside. By the time they entered, the body was badly burned, making quick identification impossible. Officials immediately reported that Bester had died in the blaze. While the fire created chaos, other parts of the plan were already in place. A large wooden TV cabinet had been brought into the facility shortly before, bypassing inspection. Investigators later suspected it was used either to move Bester or to hide tools that helped him slip through secure areas. At the same time, critical CCTV cameras went dark, clearing his path. Using this cover, Bester moved out of his section of the prison and into unsecured zones. Vehicles were allowed in and out without proper searches, giving him a way to pass beyond the gates. By the time the fire was extinguished, he was gone. The next morning, staff believed his burned body was lying in the morgue. In reality, Bester had walked out of a maximum security prison using a staged death, a planted corpse, smuggled equipment, disabled cameras, and inside assistance. It was only months later that DNA tests revealed the truth, that the body wasn't his. But on that night, every step of the plan had worked, allowing Bester to vanish while the world thought he was dead. In June 2015, 2 convicted killers, Richard Matt and David Sweat, pulled off a dramatic escape from Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Their breakout became known not just for the daring tunnel work, but also for the role a prison worker played after being seduced into helping them. Matt and Sweat were housed in adjoining cells in the prison's honor block, which gave them more freedom of movement than most inmates. Over time, they befriended Joyce Mitchell, a civilian supervisor in the prison's tailor shop. Mitchell began smuggling in items, including tools, after striking up personal relationships with both men. Investigators later revealed she had been manipulated through a mix of flattery, promises, and pressure. The inmates used hacksaw blades and other contraband tools to cut through the backs of their cells. Night after night, they chipped away at steel and concrete, hiding their work behind makeshift barriers. Once through the walls, they crawled onto a catwalk of pipes and continued their route deeper into the prison's guts. They cut through pipes, broke through walls, and fashioned dummies to fool guards during bed checks. After weeks of careful work, they finally carved a hole through a steam pipe that led outside the prison walls. On the night of June 6th, they squeezed through the pipe, emerged from a manhole in the street, and disappeared into the darkness. Mitchell was supposed to meet them with a getaway car, but she backed out at the last moment, paralyzed by fear. That decision left Matt and Sweat on foot. A massive manhunt followed, lasting 3 weeks. Matt was eventually shot and killed by authorities, while Sweat was captured alive. In August 2019, Brazilian drug trafficker Clavino da Silva attempted one of the most unusual prison escapes the country had ever seen. Locked inside the Gerasino complex in Rio de Janeiro, he decided his best shot at freedom was to walk out disguised as his own daughter after a visit. The plan was simple in theory but bold in execution. His teenage daughter came to see him in the visiting area, bringing along a disguise that included a silicone mask, glasses, a wig of long black hair, a pink t-shirt, jeans, and a bra. The idea was for da Silva to change into her clothes, let her leave behind, and then exit the prison pretending to be her. After she left the visiting area, da Silva put on the outfit. Surveillance footage later released showed him fully dressed in the disguise, adjusting the mask in front of a mirror. He looked awkward and tense, but from a distance he could pass as a young woman. Carrying the daughter's ID, he attempted to walk through the security checkpoint. Guards, however, noticed something wasn't right. His nervous behavior and stiff body language drew attention. When they asked him to remove the mask, the escape was exposed. Officers recorded the moment he peeled off the disguise, revealing himself beneath the silicone face and wig. The attempted breakout made headlines worldwide, both for its creativity and its strangeness. Authorities said the daughter could face charges for helping plan the scheme, while da Silva was transferred to a higher security facility. During the 1930s and 40s in Japan, Yoshi Shiratori earned the nickname, "the man no prison could hold," for a series of escapes that relied on careful observation, patience, and improvised tools. His first breakout came in 1936 at Aomori Prison. Shiratori had smuggled a thin piece of wire into his cell, which he bent into a crude lockpick. He carefully inserted it into the keyhole of his cell door, feeling for the pins inside. Slowly, he manipulated the mechanism until the lock turned, opening the door. He then quietly navigated hallways and guards patrols, slipping outside unnoticed until he was recaptured days later. Transferred to Akita Prison, he faced reinforced cells and stricter guards. Shiratori spent weeks studying the routines, noting when officers made their rounds. During a violent storm, he pried open a small window using a loose metal piece he had hidden. The rain drowned out his noise as he squeezed through and slipped into the night. At Abashiri Prison in Hokkaido, one of the harshest facilities in Japan, Shiratori encountered metal-framed doors and tiny windows. He observed the guards and locks meticulously, learning how to manipulate bolts and hinges. In 1944, he used a hidden metal shim to loosen the bolts of his cell door and climbed through a small gap above it, avoiding the watchful eyes of the guards. His final legendary escape was at Sapporo Prison, where he was shackled and under constant surveillance. Undeterred, he had secretly concealed a short piece of wire. Night after night, he worked on the restraints, loosening the chains and unlocking the handcuffs. Once free, he climbed into a ventilation shaft and crawled through the narrow ductwork until he emerged outside the prison walls. In 2013, a group of inmates in Punjab, India, pulled off a daring escape that quickly earned the nickname Bollywood Style for its mix of drama, improvisation, and boldness. The prisoners, held in a local jail, decided to take advantage of both ingenuity and distraction to make their move. The escape began with smuggled tools. Over time, the inmates managed to bring in small implements, saws, files, and other metal-cutting devices, which they used to gradually weaken and cut through the bars of their cells. Each night, they worked quietly, hiding their progress from guards and carefully managing the risk of discovery. To mask the noise of metal against metal, the inmates began singing loudly, chanting, and even clapping during the day. The guards assumed the sound was part of normal activity or recreational singing, never suspecting it was actually covering the scraping and cutting coming from the cells. The ruse worked perfectly, allowing the bars to be weakened to the point where they could be bent and broken. Once the bars were sufficiently compromised, the prisoners pried them open and climbed through the openings. They navigated the prison corridors and avoided the attention of guards, slipping toward the outer walls and eventually over fences or through gates left momentarily unattended. In 1995, a remarkable escape unfolded at HM Prison Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, UK, where 3 inmates, Matthew Williams, Keith Rose, and Andrew Roger, crafted a daring breakout that seemed straight out of a movie. Their plan centered around an ingenious homemade key and a meticulously constructed ladder. Williams, a convicted murderer, had observed that a red-colored master key granted access to nearly every door in the prison. With this knowledge, he and Rose, a fellow inmate, focused on replicating this key. Williams enrolled in a metalwork course within the prison workshop, gaining access to tools and materials. He then secretly shaped a rough version of the key. Testing it in the music room during a break, he found it fit but bent under pressure. Undeterred, he refined the key using stronger steel, which eventually worked flawlessly. Parallel to this, Roger, a workshop orderly, crafted a 25-foot ladder from lengths of central heating pipes. He concealed the ladder in parts around the workshop, assembling it when possible without raising suspicion. The trio planned their escape to commence from the gym area, known for its relatively weaker security. However, just before executing their plan, rumors of a potential escape using a vehicle prompted prison authorities to enhance security measures. Recognizing the increased risks, the trio decided to act swiftly. But once outside, complications quickly mounted. The weather that night was bitterly cold, slowing them down as they tried to navigate the wooded terrain around the prison. Their ladder had been noisy when deployed, drawing attention from guards. Worse, they lacked a reliable escape vehicle. Instead, they attempted to break into parked cars nearby but failed. Their movements soon caught the eye of locals, who reported suspicious activity. Within hours, police and prison staff had surrounded the area. Exhausted, cold, and with nowhere left to run, all three were recaptured before morning. In 2011, a group of Brazilian inmates pulled off one of the more inventive prison break attempts by turning the sewer system beneath their facility into a pathway to freedom. The plan was as messy as it was bold. To buy themselves time and cover, they organized small but effective distractions inside the prison. Some inmates staged arguments and scuffles in the yard, forcing guards to intervene. Others gathered in noisy groups in corners far from the sewer hatch, while meal distribution created its usual chaos. These diversions didn't spark suspicion of a breakout, but they kept the officers busy enough to miss what was happening elsewhere. Meanwhile, the escape team worked in silence at the access point to the underground tunnels. They had studied the prison's plumbing long enough to know which manhole led to a larger drainage passage. Once the hatch was opened, they slipped down into the darkness and crawled through the muck. It was cramped, foul, and dangerous, but the tunnels offered something most prison walls never would: a direct line out. The farther they went, the more the risk of getting lost or trapped grew. When the guards finally noticed the hatch had been tampered with, the escapees were already gone. Not all made it, for prisoners were discovered and pulled out before reaching the exit, caught still inside the sewer system. The others were believed to have been forced back or became disoriented within the tunnels themselves. Even for those who managed to reach manholes or potential exits, the sight of authorities swarming the area made slipping out unseen almost impossible. In 2009, a German inmate managed to walk out of prison not by digging tunnels or scaling fences, but by blending in with the very people meant to keep him inside. His escape was based on patience and observation. Over weeks, he studied the guards, how they moved, what they wore, the rhythm of their routines, and the confidence with which they carried themselves during shift changes. He noticed that during these hectic transitions, identification checks were often relaxed, with officers focused more on swapping duties than scrutinizing one another. With this knowledge, he put together a disguise that was convincing enough to pass a casual glance. Using fabric smuggled inside, he fashioned a rough but believable version of the guard uniform. The details didn't need to be perfect, just close enough to fit the hurried atmosphere of a shift change. To cover small inconsistencies, he wore sunglasses, a common accessory among guards. Most importantly, he practiced carrying himself with authority, walking with the same self-assurance he had observed for weeks. When the moment arrived, he joined the stream of guards leaving the facility. Surrounded by real officers, he didn't hesitate or slow down, knowing hesitation could draw attention. His calm, confident stride did the work for him. In the blur of bodies moving in and out, he passed through the gates without challenge. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, he was already gone. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video interesting, make sure to leave a like. If you would like a part 2, comment below your thoughts and subscribe for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.